Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to episode 6 of the Beware the Day podcast. My name is Ryan. There's over 70 million podcasts in the podcast uh, universe. Did I say 70 million? Actually, 5 million. 70 million listeners at any one time. I'm glad you chose this podcast today. Today, we're going to talk about the post World War II GI Bill. Uh, as always, I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for giving me this platform. I'm going to ask that you subscribe and follow on all of my social media: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Apple, iHeart, and Spotify. And if you want to donate to this podcast, follow the links on the screen. If you are a business owner, you have a brick and mortar business, you've had that business for more than 5 years, and you are interested in boosting your profitability and cash flow, if you're looking for affordable healthcare solutions, or you just simply want to promote and build generational wealth, visit my Facebook page, KRC Companies LLC, for more information. Now, before we dive into the post World War II GI Bill, I want to, once again, since it is Black History Month, I want to spotlight a Black artist, someone that you may or may not be familiar with. I could have gone with any number of performing artists or visual artists, but I'd like to focus on individuals that you may or may not be familiar with. Today's spotlight is on Jacob Lawrence. Jacob Lawrence was born September 7th, 1917, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He is known for his portrayal of African American historical subjects in contemporary life. At the age of 23, he gained national recognition with his 60-panel series entitled The Migration, which depicted the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North. And if you recall, in a previous episode, we talked at length about the Great Migration. Lawrence illustrated several works for children. Harriet and the Promised Land appeared in 1968 and used the series of paintings that told the story of Harriet Tubman, and it was listed as one of the year's best illustrated books by the New York Times and praised by the Boston Globe. In 1980, he completed Exploration, which is a 40-foot long mural made of porcelain on steel, comprising a dozen panels devoted to academic endeavor, and it was installed in Howard University's Blackburn Center. In 1999, he and his wife established the Jacob and Gwendolyn Lawrence Foundation for the creation, presentation, and study of African American art, with a particular emphasis on work by African American artists. Lawrence continued to paint until a few weeks before his death from lung cancer on June 9, 2000, at the age of 82. And in May of 2007, the White House Historical Association purchased Lawrence's The Builders at an auction for $2.5 million, and the painting has hung in the White House Green Room since 2009. So my challenge to you today is to go to the internet, go to Google, and look up Jacob Lawrence and learn more about this amazing African American artist. Now, on to today's lesson. Just to quickly recap the last episode, we talked about the Great Depression and the New Deal. We talked at length about how these federal programs, which had the best of intentions, everything from Social Security to unemployment insurance. Again, the problem with programs is that they are administered at African Americans in the South. That didn't go very well. Once again, they were shortchanged, and we went into detail as to how they were hurt by the New Deal because of the way these programs were administered locally. And today's lesson is quite similar. We're going to talk about the GI Bill, which is, once again, you can refer to The Color of Wealth, Chapter 3. The GI Bill was also known as the Service Members Readjustment Act of 1944. The purpose of this bill was to make education and home ownership affordable for World War II veterans. More than $95 billion was spent between 1944 and 1971 on education benefits as well as housing benefits for for World War II veterans. Um, the GI Bill focused basically on three areas: housing, education, and employment. Now, in theory, veterans of all races were eligible for these benefits. However, European American veterans enjoyed a greater share of benefits. Now, in order to enjoy these benefits, an honorable discharge was required. However, a disproportionate number of African American veterans received general discharges, making them ineligible for benefits. For example, if a soldier protested how he was being treated, the establishment would, instead of giving him an honorable discharge, would give him a general discharge, making him ineligible for GI Bill benefits. Approximately 2 million out of 16 million World War II veterans attended college under the GI Bill. So we're going to talk about education. Now, African American veterans were not allowed to attend most white colleges, which led to overcrowded classrooms at historically Black colleges and universities. 55% of African American veteran applicants were turned away due to overcrowding. Vocational education and job placement benefits were available. However, these benefits were administered locally, and African American veterans in the South were given menial jobs. So let's say if you were a welder in the Army, so you take your welding certification to the local employment office called the United States Employment Services. Let's say you're in Mississippi, you say, hey, I was a welder in the Army. I said, that's great, but you're going to be a janitor. Of course, that there's a huge difference between what you get paid to be a welder versus what you get paid to be as a janitor. And if you protested, in other words, if you were saying, look, I'm a qualified welder, I'm not going to be anybody's janitor. Well, if by refusing that job placement made you ineligible for unemployment insurance. So local United States Employment Services Centers were responsible for veteran job placement. In 1946, job placement centers in the South placed 86% of European Americans. They were placed in professional and skilled jobs, while 92% of African American veterans were placed in unskilled and service jobs. State coordinators of education services made it difficult for African Americans to obtain vocational training. So what would happen is these so-called educational services, they were pretty much fly-by-night operations. They were stood up to take advantage of the GI Bill, but at the end of the day, the certification was bogus. They would often just simply take money from the veterans, or they would not offer any type of decent vocational training at the end of the day. As I stated earlier, many training programs were useless. Veterans who complained were disenrolled and subsequently ineligible for unemployment benefits. So you can see how the GI Bill was passed with the best of intentions. However, there were obstacles, and a disproportionate number of World War II African American veterans were affected. Now, let's pivot to home ownership. Now, in theory, first-time home buyers of all races were able to get low-interest mortgages guaranteed by either the Veterans, it was called the Veterans Administration at the time. Now it's the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the Federal Housing Agency. Now, it was the Federal Housing Administration, I'm sorry. It was the responsibility of the veteran to find lenders and sellers. Here again, this was a challenge for African American veterans, particularly in the South. Now, this next statistic I almost fell out of my chair when I saw this. Ebony Magazine did a survey in 1947, and this survey revealed that out of 3,229 VA loans in 13 cities in the state of Mississippi, only 2 VA loans went to African American veterans. Not 2%, 2 out of more than 3,200 VA loans. So you can kind of get an idea of what those veterans were up against, particularly in the South. Over $120 billion in home loans were financed by the VA and the FHA by 1962, but less than 2% of these loans went to African American veterans. You know, the recurring theme of this podcast is creating generational wealth. Well, it's commonly known that real estate is definitely a route to generational wealth. So you think about all of the loans that were denied, and then you adjust that dollar amount for inflation, you kind of get an idea of what's been lost in terms of generational wealth to World War II veterans. So we have a government entity denying home loans. Harm was done. So don't you think that perhaps that entity needs to repair the harm that's been done? It's called reparations. We'll talk more about that at another time. Anyway, moving right along. So less than 2% of these loans went to African American veterans. The FHA had an underwriting guide, and that underwriting manual banned loans in integrated neighborhoods. So once again, we have a government entity doing harm to Americans. Since harm was done, they need to fix that. Restrictive covenants. What is a restrictive covenant? Well, a restrictive covenant is language that's placed in a real estate contract which says that if you are a member of the white race, you can only sell this home to a member of the white race. Restrictive covenants were placed in real estate contracts requiring white homeowners to only sell to white buyers. African Americans, as a result, paid more for poor quality housing. A severe housing shortage forced many African Americans into overcrowded neighborhoods. The Housing Act of 1954 destroyed 400,000 homes rented by African Americans, and only 10,760 homes were replaced by affordable housing. In 1940, the Supreme Court banned the practice of keeping African Americans from purchasing homes in white areas. Restrictive covenants were banned by the Supreme Court in 1948. Then the FHA stopped subsidizing mortgages with race restrictions in 1950. So we're making some progress here. Racial discrimination in public housing was banned in 1962. However, less than 1% of all housing in the US was covered. So it took a couple of Supreme Court decisions, and we know now in 2024 the difference between a decision and a law. A decision can be reversed, but a law codifies and sets it in stone. So that didn't come along until the Fair Housing Act in 1962. So we have seen how the post-World War II GI Bill was passed with the best of intentions to essentially give birth to what we know today as the American middle class. Veterans were able to get into homes with mortgages at interest rates that were lower than non-veterans. They had educational opportunities, and they had opportunities for employment and job training. Unfortunately, African Americans were shortchanged. African American veterans did not have the opportunity to enjoy the same benefits as their white counterparts. So next week, we're going to talk about the struggle for equality, and I'm going to focus on housing and education. In closing, once again, I want to thank Black El Paso Voice for giving me this platform. Make sure you tune into other programs on this platform: Suite 915 with Curtis and Fedora, Real Talk with Marcus McCoy, and please support the podcast. You will find those links on the screen. Once again, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care.